Hey, Andy, how are you?
I'm well. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here too, and I'm glad to be having an opportunity to talk about your new book, which is always an exciting day for me. And I don't think I will ever not be excited, but I'm excited about yours because it's a children's book, and there's also something, it's the holiday season coming upon us, and so there's a lot of goodness that I think we'll be able to get into in just a couple of minutes. But before I dive kind of right into the questions, which is where I would love to be, I will just share quickly that my name's Jen Grace, and I'm the founder and CEO of Publisher Purpose. And so it is PYP's honor and privilege to connect with you and work with you on getting this really awesome book out there. So if you want to just kind of share a little bit about yourself, Andy, because then I have just a number of questions about how you created this.
Well, I began my career. I graduated college in the Paleozoic era. In about 1973, I graduated, and over a few years, I uh, was hired by a company named Chilton Company, which produced all kinds of specialty industry publications. And I was hired on as a graphic designer, but quickly fell into a sort of resident illustrator. That they had so much boring material to illustrate that it offered me the opportunity to kind of you know hone my chops as a humorous illustrator. And after about 3 years, I went out on my own. I was a humorous illustrator and remain a humorous illustrator for my entire career. But I did um, have some rather diverse detours into graphic design, corporate communication. Um, for a spell, I did a fair amount of contributing commentary to the Philadelphia Inquirer editorial page. And then about 10 years ago, um, I revisited some old ideas that I had for children's books that, you know, I had literally 25, 30 years ago. And um, I thought, well, let's revisit that. And I started to take it very seriously.
Mhm.
I joined the wonderful organization SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, um, which was profoundly helpful. And so I learned some things about writing for children and took on some of those early ideas that I had and brought them forward with what I had learned. And had my first children's book published in 2011.
Nice. So many things. So many things. So I'm going to put up on our screen for a moment what your latest creation. So tell me more about why a red rhinoceros.
Well, I was sitting in a coffee shop, music, yeah, just sort of musing to myself in the way I guess that authors do one way or another for just about any project, sort of asking myself what if questions. Um, and I just had this notion, well, um, what would be the most unlikely thing that could happen to a child? Um, and so I just had this thing. Well, what if a child stumbled on at that moment? It was a hippopotamus, um, and took a liking to it, and they got involved in some sort of way, and so that's really the genesis of the project. Was just this rather um, frankly silly idea that I decided to take seriously, and that's where it started.
Hmm. And so I feel like it was clear when you were talking that your background is in illustration. So I love that, because sometimes we'll work with authors that, they have a book idea, they have kind of a storyboard, but then you have to go hire an illustrator to kind of do all of the significant legwork that goes into a book like this. And so it was really kind of cool, the fact that you're both the author and the illustrator, which I feel like doesn't always happen. So, how does I guess that make you, I don't know, make you feel at this point, knowing that you're now, I guess, two-time author, right? And so, and
Well,
different from a decade ago, or more than a decade ago, I guess.
well, actually, this is my fourth children's book, and I did have a book published in the Mesozoic era. Um, uh, it was called the Liberated Father's Handbook, and it really dealt with pregnancy from a liberated father's point of view,
Interesting.
published by St. Martin's Press. So I've actually had 5 books published.
Jeez.
Um, so, but because I was a freelance illustrator, or an illustrator first and foremost, my struggle was to learn enough about writing for children in particular. Um, and I had a number of projects that, I sort of had a notion of a story and kind of got something down on a piece of paper, and then I thought mistakenly that I could illustrate the hell out of it, and some publishing company would be so in love with my illustration that it would become a book.
Mm.
And I found to my shock that no, they really take the writing part seriously. And so a number of these books, despite tremendous amount of work, mostly on illustration, never passed muster. So I have sort of the reverse problem that most authors
Mm-hmm.
have. I was an illustrator in search of an author inside of myself, um, as opposed to what most children's book authors,
Mm-hmm.
they're not capable of creating their visuals. So
Mm-hmm.
um, for me, the visuals were the easy part. The hard part was writing a storyline, story arc that was original, that had something to say, that was entertaining,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So
Yeah.
that was my challenge.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting too is just having the reverse lens on it, that you made an interesting choice by making your main character very like discreet or subtle, or I'm not sure what word to put there. And that was like an intentional decision. And is it safe to, and I would love for you to explain that, like what that means, where your kind of main character is not super visible, but also, was that a design choice that happened first, or was it a story choice?
No, it was definitely a story choice. And in fact, when I first thought about this story, in a typical way, um, my prior children's books, my first one was about a little boy named Alex Smart, uh, who is involved in who adores pickles, and he has an adventure regarding that. My second book was Delia's Dull Day, and then I came to this book, and I had this very nebulous idea about a child interacting with a large mammal, and initially I thought, well, let's see. My last picture book for children was about a girl, so I'll make this one about a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't love that because books are very often kind of categorized for boys or girls, depending on who the main character is. And then beyond that, uh, what's the ethnicity of this child? Is it an Asian child? Is it a Caucasian child, a black child, and being a white middle class author, it felt a bit unnatural to me to um, arbitrarily pick a black child um, or anything other than a white child. And so I was struggling with this, and both the sex of the child and the ethnicity of the child. And I don't know. I just finally I had already decided on the name of the book. Is Sometimes You Find a Red Rhinoceros, or by that time it arrived at rhinoceros,
Mm-hmm.
and it suddenly dawned on me that I could illustrate the story in the second person, you, to match the title, you, so that I could leave the child, for the most part, only implied at the edges of the story,
Mm-hmm.
and not have to solve the problem. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? I did have to struggle some with skin tones to try to find some ambiguous kind of um, mixed race kind of tone. But to the greatest extent possible, I wanted the book to be able to be held by any child,
Mm-hmm.
boy or girl, of just about any race, and have them participate in this whimsical adventure with this animal.
Mm. So
And
good.
so that, I mean, that did present a lot of challenges in terms of how do I frame these illustrations so that I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to play around a lot with where are the hands and feet or the bits of torso, and that imply this child interacting in this story. And I like to think that I've succeeded to the extent that people tell me that they're not even aware that I didn't show a child,
Mm-hmm.
which tells me, okay, good job. uh,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't feel the absence of a child, a particular child.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know that you were going for like a whimsical type of vibe to it, and you had some intentionality behind why you wanted it to kind of transcend kind of what's happening in the media and the news right now. So can you share a little bit about that?
I um, certainly am not opposed. I mean, there's all kinds of books relating to diversity and in children's literature, and there are um, a growing numbers of books about the environment, of which I'm trying to write one.
Mhm.
Um, so it's not that I'm opposed in any way to approaching those kinds of social issues, but I definitely feel that there is a strong need to allow children to just have fun. Um, they uh, they are, our world is so saturated through television and social media and so on. And we're sort of bombarded with very, very difficult issues and events. And even if you're a careful parent or teacher trying to kind of insulate young children from some of the worst of it, I'm sure that they're impacted. It's just very hard to put children inside a sort of a media capsule
Mm,
and keep them from feeling all these things that are going on around them. And
mm,
so I really wanted this book to join the long history of whimsical literature for children, Edward Lear and so on, um, just so that they can laugh and
mhm.
and have fun And so that was my hope for this book.
That's so good. And so what are your plans with this? Like what are, talk to me. What do you want this book to do, I should say?
Well, I would like to see the book, gain traction and, uh, find its way into schools and libraries. And I love interacting with children. My prior books, I have very much enjoyed going to schools and book fairs and those kinds of events and interacting with people. And I like to talk to children. I use I use my presentations not to simply read my book and talk about the book, but also to talk about how a very old idea became a new idea when I looked at it again.
Mm-hmm.
I like to talk to children about how my style has changed over time as I have grown as an illustrator. I like to talk to children about the creative process and you know the sometimes unpleasant but necessary task of looking and looking again at what you've done, um, and revising it and changing it. You know, I would just show, you know, these are some early, these are, oops,
Yeah.
these are some early watercolor
Yeah.
drawings that I did of the rhinoceros, when I was doing most of my work in a traditional black and white, sorry, pen and ink and watercolor
Mhm.
uh, method. And a rhinoceros is a very kind of complicated animal.
Mhm.
And it took me a long while to get to a simply understood to me, organic,
Mhm.
fun characterization of the the rhinoceros.
Mhm.
So, again, I like to show children these early sketches, or things that I thought were fine at the time, and then I had to say, no, it's still not right. And so, and I like to, widen the discussion about creativity in general to include, whether you're a doctor, a scientist, an architect, an actor, that you're always stretching yourself and you're trying to, um, hone your skill and look at yourself, look at what you've done critically, uh, and say, could this be better?
Mm.
And so that they have a wider understanding of what creativity looks like, regardless of whether they go into writing for children or
Yeah.
whether they become something else entirely.
Mm. That's so interesting. Oh, that's so good. And so I know that, we've talked in the past about, getting schools and, being able to kind of go into schools and do book readings and things like that, and maybe libraries and all that fun stuff. I know you're in the mid-Atlantic part of the United States, so I would say if anyone is in that general area that has an opportunity for you to come in and, just do a book reading to a classroom, that would be a fantastic outcome.
Well, and of course, I was just talking to I have two daughters who are educators, who are teachers.
Mhm.
And I was talking to my youngest, who's in a nearby school district. And I said, I would like at some point to come in. And she says, oh, we're not having anybody come in.
Mhm.
So this is kind of a problem. And that doesn't mean that, you know, uh, certainly it's possible. And I expect that I will be doing Zoom presentations to
Mhm.
school. But, we live in this very problematic environment right now where
Mhm.
it's difficult. But that doesn't mean that um, the presentations can't be made. It
Mhm.
might feel a little bit more remote, so to speak, and not quite as satisfying. I do like being with the children, you know, and feeling the energy of the auditorium or whatever.
Yeah.
But you have to do what works. So.
And the beauty of children's books is that they're timeless. So you've got all the time in the world to be marketing yours and getting into those things. So that's good. That is definitely good. So
Well,
as we're, oh, what's that?
that is, yeah, that's a one of the pluses of the genre. Yeah, is that they're not dated. So usually, anyway.
You know, I found I had electricians at my house recently installing ceiling fans, and they went up into my attic and they found an original Dr. Seuss Green Eggs and Handbook
Yeah.
and an original I think it's called The Little House from 1942, like two just random children's books that are up in my attic. Both are worth a lot of money apparently, and when I was looking, they both are still like huge sellers. So it's one of those things that they're both from like the 40s, and you know they're still selling quite well. So the beautiful
Well, of
children's.
course, Dr. Seuss is you know, an icon. I'm not familiar with the other book, but certainly any first edition of a Dr. Seuss book would fall into that.
Yeah, it's not in great condition because it was in my hot attic for decades, but it's still cool to have. So I'm just
Absolutely,
it's fun,
absolutely.
especially as someone who's a nerd about books, so it works out perfect. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. How I know we have the redrhinocerosbook.com scrolling across the bottom of the screen. If people want to purchase your book, they can certainly go to wherever their favorite place to purchase books are. Certainly it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Of course, we want to promote, you know, supporting your local small business, bookstore, independent bookstores, things like that. But anything else that you want to kind of share that how people can get engaged with you?
Um, well, not offhand. I do feel a little bit. Uh, what would be the word? My first inclination is to tell people that they can go get the book on Amazon, and I do. You know, I do actually encourage people to go to their favorite local bookstore and acquire the book there. Um, you know, to support them and as well. And you know, I'm hoping that people will respond warmly to the book, and if they do, share the news. So with friends and family, so that as to the extent possible, as many people as possible enjoy the book.
Yeah, it's a great holiday gift. You know, 'tis the season. Purchase it for somebody else, purchase for a kid in your life. And bookshop.org. So if you're in an area that doesn't have an independent bookstore, bookshop.org functions as an online independent bookstore that just gives back in so many ways to just kind of the independent book world. So I strongly encourage that too.
I will add one last thing, which you know, at the end of the book, I do have a call to action page, and certainly in the world of wildlife, rhinoceri, are among the very most endangered species on the planet. And so, you know, I do in the book encourage people to go to wildlife, what is it now? The wildlife organizations that I mentioned to support, you know, habitat and you know, hopefully keep these animals, you know, these precious last animals alive and well, and to the extent that they can be thriving before they're lost. So
Yeah.
I would encourage you to do that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic call to action. And in the comments, we've had a number of PYP authors popping in and being supportive and saying that they're going to check out the book too. So it's one big family here in terms of supporting one another. So go out, get the book. 'Tis the season. If you want to reach out to Andy directly, redrhinocerosbook.com is the way to do it. And I thank you for your time today, Andy. This was a fun conversation.
It was. I enjoyed it.